The hallway at St. Gabriel Medical Center was too quiet for a place where people came to cling to life. The lights hummed overhead. The air conditioner rattled in the ceiling, a low, steady vibration that slipped under the skin. Mara Quinn felt it before she heard it. A faint tremor in the soles of her sneakers. A soft, uneven thrum. For half a breath, it was not a hospital building at dawn. It was rotors cutting through desert air above a black valley. Her fingers tightened on the handle of the linen cart. She blinked once, and the illusion broke. White walls, polished floor, plastic plants leaning toward artificial light. No dust, no smoke, no flares. Just the night shift slipping out and the day shift trickling in. She forced her shoulders to relax and pushed the cart forward. Her scrubs were exactly like everyone else's, pale blue and anonymous. Her badge said M. Quinn, RN in block letters. No rank, no unit, no history. She moved in a straight line quietly like a shadow that had been taught to keep its back to the wall. Quinn. The voice cut from behind, sharp and bright. She turned. Charge nurse Karen Blake stood at the door of Supply 2, clipboard in hand, ponytail tight, expression tighter. "You here to move linens or sightsee?" Karen asked. "Because whatever that pace is, it's not ER pace." Mara shifted the cart into the doorway without arguing. "Sorry," she said. "Where do you want these?" Karen jabbed the clipboard toward the shelves. Top row, bottom row, all labeled. "You skipped 2 items on the restock checklist yesterday. We do not skip items here. We do not do things halfway. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Run the list again. Out loud. While you stock, I need to know you can keep up." Mara took the laminated sheet with both hands. Her voice stayed low and even as she named each item. Gauze, saline, IV start kits. The words fell into a rhythm, almost like counting, almost like something she already knew by heart. Karen listened just long enough to feel satisfied that she had been clear, then stepped away. At the nurse's station, Dr. Noah Patel leaned one hip against the counter, sipping coffee that smelled like it had been burned twice. He watched Mara move between shelves. That the new hire, he asked the resident beside him. He did not lower his voice. "Yeah," the resident said. "Night shift says she barely talks." Noah tilted his head, considering. "She looks like she'd faint at a nosebleed," he said. Whose idea was it to put her in the emergency department? The resident laughed under his breath. Karen smirked without turning around. Mara heard enough to understand, not enough to be sure she was supposed to. Her cheeks warmed, but the rest of her stayed very still. She finished the checklist, signed her initials in the margin, and rolled the cart away. In the staff locker room, the noise of the hospital faded. The air was a little stale. Disinfectant and body spray mixed into a tired smell that clung to the metal lockers. Mara opened hers. A pair of running shoes, a folded sweatshirt from a generic college with no real meaning to her, a brown tin box scuffed at the corners, no label. She checked the doorway, then pulled the box out and set it on the bench. The lid stuck for a second before it popped open with a soft metallic click. Inside, wrapped in an old t-shirt, lay a small cluster of metal, a Navy SEAL trident, and a combat medic badge. The trident's wings were worn at the edges. A shallow scratch cut across the anchor. The overhead light caught them. A thin flare of white slid over the gold and silver, then vanished. Her thumb brushed the trident. The metal was cold. For a heartbeat, the locker room dissolved. Heat pressed at her from all sides. The smell was sand and cordite and burned oil. In her ears, the quiet hum of the hospital's air conditioner stretched and rose into the heavy chop of rotors circling a dark valley. "Quinn status." A voice from a radio that was no longer there. Her throat tightened. She snapped the lid closed and shoved the tin back into the shadows of the locker. The sound of metal on metal rang a little too loud in the empty room. She closed the door gently and turned the combination with steady fingers. From the narrow window at the end of the hall, she could see the outline of the rooftop access structure. A flight of cement steps climbed to a locked metal door. Above it, the shadow of the helipad fence, a faint rectangle against the pale sky. As she stepped outside to wheel a trash bag toward the service area, the breeze shifted. Faintly from somewhere beyond the hospital and the city came the chop of real helicopter blades, low, distant, routine. A maintenance tech in a faded ball cap paused beside her, following her gaze upward. "That pad," he said. "Budget cuts killed it. No birds land up there anymore." Mara gave a small nod and dragged the trash bag to the dumpster. The man walked away humming something off-key. The far-off rotor sound faded into traffic noise. By 9:30, the hospital had settled into a kind of tense normal. Phones rang. Wheels squeaked. Someone laughed too loudly near the break room. Mara was in room 308, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around a woman's thin arm when the alarm went off. "Code blue room 312, code blue room 312. The words repeated in a flat female voice over the intercom. The sound sliced straight past the rational part of her brain. The pitch changed in her ears, stretching, warping, until it was not a PA system at all. It was the harsh crackle of comms, the clipped call sign of a wounded team on a slope of rock. She took one slow breath, the cuff inflated and hissed. The patient in 308 looked up nervous. "Is that bad?" the woman asked. "It's someone who needs help, that's all," Mara said. "You're okay, I'll be right back to finish." She left the cuff where it was and stepped into the hall. Karen was already sprinting toward 3112 stethoscopes slapping against her chest. Noah was 3 steps behind with a med student shouting for the crash cart. A tech pushed it fast enough that it rattled drawers clicking. Mara followed. In 312, Mr. Henderson lay flat on the bed, skin-gray eyes rolled back. The monitor beside him screamed a single high note. His chest barely moved. Karen grabbed for the cart. Her hands went to the wrong drawer, yanked it open, stared at syringes that were not the ones she needed. "Where are the paddles?" she snapped. "They're on the top. They were on the top," the tech said, voice jumping. "Somebody get the epi," Noah said. "I need 1 milligram of epinephrine right now." The med student turned in a circle, scanning labels, fingers hovering over vials but not committing. The room swelled with sound. Shoes squeaked, plastic crinkled. The monitor kept its single note long and unwavering. Mara stopped at the edge of the chaos. Her heart rate climbed, but her hands cooled. The alarm in the ceiling faded. In its place, she heard a count that lived in her bones. The beat of compressions, the timing of a drug hitting a vein, the small window where a stopped heart might still agree to start again. She stepped forward, placing herself at the head of the bed. "Move, please," she said quietly. Karen looked up, startled. "I said move," Mara repeated a fraction firmer. Something in her tone cut through the panic. Karen stepped aside before she could think to object. The tech with the crash cart shifted left. The med student flattened against the wall. Mara laced her fingers and set the heel of her hand in the center of Mr. Henderson's chest. "Charge to 200, she said. 1 milligram epi IV push, now." Noah stared at her for a half-second, then snapped at the med student. "You heard her. Go." Mara began compressions. Straight arms, locked elbows, 30 counts in her head, steady and exact. Bone and cartilage pressed back against her palms. Air pushed out of his lungs with a soft broken sound each time she drove down. The rest of the room narrowed until all that was left was the rhythm in her hands. The defibrillator whined to full charge. "Clear," Noah called. Mara lifted off the chest. The paddles kissed Mr. Henderson's skin. His body jerked. The smell of burned hair and ozone crept into the air for a moment, sharp and clean. The monitor faltered, then resolved into a delicate up and down. Beep, beep, beep. Weak but regular. The high alarm cut off. A softer tone took its place, synced to the new beat. Mr. Henderson dragged in a shuddering breath. His eyelids twitched. The room let out air as if everyone had been holding it at once. "Sinus rhythm," Noah said almost to himself. His eyes were on the screen, but his attention kept flicking to Mara's face. Mara stepped back. Her hands were still. Her chest rose and fell a little faster than usual, but her expression had already closed. "Quinn," Noah said, "where did you learn timing like that?" She pulled off her gloves and dropped them in the red bin. "I've worked in places where there is no margin for error," she said. "That's all." Karen found her voice again. "You acted outside procedure," she said. The statement came out thinner than it would have an hour before. "You do not give orders in my code. I will not have rogue heroics in this unit." Mara kept her eyes on the floor. "I apologize," she said. "I should have waited." Mr. Henderson coughed. His fingers twitched toward the rails. The med student moved to adjust his oxygen. Noah glanced from the patient to Mara, distrust and curiosity tangled on his face. Mara turned and walked out to the sink. She scrubbed her hands, though the gloves had already kept them clean. Water ran over the fine white line of an old scar across her knuckles. The hum of the hospital settled back into its usual pitch. Somewhere above, the air conditioner rattled in the ceiling, a quiet echo of rotors that were not here. The hum of the hospital had almost found its usual level again when the building shivered. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor in the floor, like a truck passing too close. The faucet in front of Mara rattled. Water beaded on the steel of the sink, vibrating in thin rings. She turned off the tap and stood still. The air conditioner in the ceiling chimed in with its regular rattle, but under it something deeper rolled through the walls. A low pulsing thud, slow at first, then closing in. Her chest tightened, her fingers curled against her palms. In her memory, the sound was always tied to darkness and hot wind and the taste of dust between her teeth. In the mirror over the sink, she saw her own reflection, pale blue scrubs, damp hair pulled back. Nothing like the woman who had huddled under a rocky lip of ground, counting seconds between artillery bursts. The floor trembled again. Bottles on the counter chimed against each other. A tech stuck his head into the doorway. You feel that he asked, eyes a little wider than usual. Security says something's coming in overhead. He was already moving before she could answer. The intercom crackled, then cut off, as if someone had started to speak and thought better of it. Voices rose in the hallway. They were not the clipped phrases of codes and orders this time, just the sharp edge of curiosity and something that sounded like anticipation. Mara dried her hands and stepped out. Down the corridor, staff were pressed to the long windows that overlooked the parking lot and the distant line of the bay. Someone said the word helicopter. Someone else said Navy. Then the sound hit properly. It rolled over the hospital like thunder repeating on itself. The air shook, fluorescent panels buzzed, the metal frames of the windows hummed. Rotors close. Mara stopped walking. Her heart picked up, but her feet felt anchored to the floor. For a breath, she was not in a climate-controlled hallway in Southern California. She was on a ledge of broken stone, the sky above her black and torn by searchlights, a helicopter hanging somewhere in the darkness that would not come close enough. "Quinn!" Karen's voice snapped down the hall. "Quinn, move!" Mara blinked. The corridor snapped back into shape. Karen was at the far end now, one hand braced on the nurse's station hair, loose from its tight ponytail eyes on the ceiling as dust sifted down from a vent. "What is that?" the med student from the code blue asked, gripping the counter. "Roof pad," a security guard answered, jogging past. His radio spat static. "We have a helo inbound, Navy bird emergency landing. They locked in coordinates for our helipad." "That pad is closed," Karen said. "No one uses it." "Apparently they do now," the guard said without stopping. He pushed through the fire door for the stairwell. 2 more staff members caught it before it swung shut, slipping in behind him. The hallway filled with footsteps as people moved to follow, drawn by instinct to go see the thing rattling the sky above their heads. Karen clapped her hands once. "People, we still have patients on the floor," she called. "You are not tourists. You do not abandon your posts because something loud lands on the roof." Her voice rode above the noise, but even she was walking toward the stairs. Mara was standing in front of the window. Through the glass, she could see movement high above, a gray shape circling, then lowering behind the concrete lip that hid the helipad from street view. Wind kicked a loose plastic bag up and plastered it against the glass, then tore it away. The whole building vibrated in a slow pounding rhythm. The guard's radio barked again somewhere in the stairwell. The words were muffled by doors and concrete, but one term carried clear inbound trauma. "Mara." The syllables of her name came from closer this time. Noah was at her shoulder, coffee-gone ID badge bouncing against his chest. "You good?" he asked. "You look like you're about to pass out." "I am fine," she said. Her voice sounded flat in her own ears. He frowned, searching her face for something he could understand, then shook his head and trotted after the rest. The fire door banged open once more, this time from the inside. A man in a Navy flight suit and tactical vest stepped out, ducking on reflex as if the ceiling above him was lower than it was. His hair was close-cropped, his jaw set hard. A rectangular patch with a trident was sewn to his chest. He was breathing as if he had run up more stairs than the building actually had. "Where is she?" he shouted over the fading thrum of the rotors. "Where is Specialist Mara Quinn?" The words hit the hall like another shockwave. Conversation cut off. Nurses, techs, residents, even Karen turned as one. Mara felt dozens of eyes land on her before anyone said anything. It was not a dramatic moment of recognition. Nothing in her posture had changed. Nothing about her face was different. Only the name hanging in the air and the direction of their attention made her visible in a new way. Karen blinked once, then looked from Mara to the man in the flight suit. "You must have the wrong person," she said. "She's a floor nurse. She just transferred. She is not military." The man's gaze moved past her. It found Mara and locked there. "Quinn," he said, breathless with urgency, not surprise. "Thank God. I was starting to think the file was out of date." He closed the distance in 4 long strides. "Commander Lucas Hanley," he said. "Naval Special Warfare. We have a SEAL on board with a penetrating chest trauma. We could not risk the flight back to base. We were told this was the closest hospital with a helipad and that you were here." Karen stared between them, color draining from her face. "You are looking for a combat medic," she said slowly, as if the words might turn into something else if she spoke them carefully enough. "She is not that." Hanley did not look at her. "We need you on the roof, Doc," he said to Mara. "Right now." Doc. The title landed even heavier than the rest. Mara looked down at her own badge. The letters there did not change. RN. No mention of anything that had come before. Her hands were still damp from the sink water cooling on the backs of her fingers. There were faint red marks where the glove cuffs had cut into her wrists during compressions. The building shook again as the helicopter adjusted on its skids. She could taste metal on her tongue. How bad, she asked. Left chest wound, decreased breath sounds, dropping pressure, respiratory rate crashing. Hanley spoke fast, but clearly the way people did when they had said the same words into too many radios. "We tried needle decompression in the field. It bought us minutes, not more. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped where it should not be, squeezing the heart, collapsing the lung. Air conditioner or artillery hospital or hillside, the math inside a body stayed the same. Karen reached out, fingers closing around Mara's sleeve. She is not credentialed for invasive surgery here, she said. Her voice wobbled, but the intent in it was the same as always. Control. She barely cleared her orientation. If this is some kind of old record, it needs to be fixed through proper channels, not on my roof. Hanley's eyes flicked to Karen, then back to Mara. Specialist Mara Quinn. He said, pronouncing each word with deliberate care, served as the primary combat medic for SEAL Team 9. That is not an old record. The hallway had gone silent again. The distant rotors, shifting air, the hiss of ventilators in nearby rooms, all of it formed a tight ring of sound around them. Mara's pulse beat against the inside of her throat. She could have said no. She could have said she did not do that any more, that she was a nurse, now that she stocked shelves and took vitals and almost made it through a shift without hearing rotors in the walls. A picture flashed in her head instead. Not iron veil, not gunfire, not flames. A stranger on a stretcher in a shaking metal shell of a helicopter, each breath shallower than the last, the slope of his chest shifting wrong under blood and bandages. Take me to him, she said. Hanley's shoulders dropped half an inch in relief. He turned toward the stairwell. Roof access, he said, this way. Karen let go of Mara's sleeve as if it had burned her. You walk out of my unit without authorization, Quinn. You are finished here, she said. Mara glanced back at her. I will sign whatever you need, she said quietly. Later. She followed Hanley into the stairwell. The sound hit harder there, boxed in by concrete. The closer they climbed, the more the rotors seemed to sit inside her chest. Each step felt both heavy and urgent, as if the stairs themselves were trying to slow her down, while the air tried to drag her upward. At the top, Hanley shouldered open the roof door. Wind punched through the gap, hot and sharp with jet fuel. It grabbed at Mara's scrubs cracked against her face. The sky overhead was a hard, bleached blue. The helicopter squatted in the middle of the painted circle gray and purposeful rotors still turning. Loose paper whipped across the pad and slammed into the chain link around the edge. A plastic crate skittered, caught on a bolt, rattled. 2 corpsmen in flight helmets stood by the open side door, braced against the vibration. One lifted a hand in a brief, jerky wave toward Hanley. On the stretcher inside, a body lay strapped down in harnesses and belts. 4 lines taped bandages, darkening over the left side of his chest. Mara squinted against the wind and climbed up into the cabin. Heat and noise wrapped around her. The smell was thick sweat layered over antiseptic and the oily tang of the engines. Up close, the patient's face was visible. Dark hair matted with dried blood along one temple. Stubble gray against skin that was pasty from blood loss. Oxygen mask fogged with each weak exhale. Name, Mara shouted. One of the corpsmen leaned in. Lieutenant Jacob Reddick, he yelled back. Call sign red. The name hit her like a fist between the ribs. Jacob Reddick. She knew the shape of that name in someone else's voice. Knew how it sounded when said in a clipped command or with a laugh over bad coffee or strained through radio static. Quinn, move your feet. Quinn, you good. Quinn, you do not die on me today, you hear me? The face on the stretcher was older, carved by lines that had not been there in her last clear memory of him, but the set of his jaw, the angle of his nose, the scar at the corner of his eyebrow, all of it was the same. His eyes opened just a sliver. They found her. Thought you were a ghost, he rasped through the mask. His voice was raw, barely sound, but the cadence was familiar enough to cut through everything else. For 1 second, her hands did not know where to go. The cabin tilted under her, even though the helicopter was level. Her vision narrowed until only his face was left. Iron Veil crashed into her full force this time. The Black Valley. The delayed bird that never came in time. The bodies that had not made it to a stretcher. She inhaled sharply enough that it hurt. Her palm lifted of its own accord and struck her own cheek, not hard, just enough to sting. The shock put a clean edge back on the moment. Reddick's chest rose and fell shallow and uneven. The left side lagged. The bandage there bulged in a way that spoke of air trap not moving. She put one hand on his shoulder, the other along the line of his ribs. Tension pneumo, she called. Left side, we cannot wait. The nearest corpsman nodded, eyes wide. I need 2 large-bore IV lines, she said. Clamp here. Prep for chest tube. Get me a needle long enough for decompression if the first one failed. The words came out calm and precise. The corpsman moved, grateful for someone who sounded like they knew which of the 100 choices in front of them to grab first. Back at the door, Karen had reached the rooftop. Her hair snapped around her face in the wind. She stayed just outside the radius of the spinning blades, but her voice carried. You cannot do this, she shouted. You are not authorized. This is not an operating room. It is a landing pad. If he dies up here, this hospital is finished. Hanley stepped toward her. The edge in his posture that had been held in check until now sharpened. If she does not do this, he dies before an elevator opens, he said. And if anyone gets in her way, I will spend the rest of my career making sure their name is on a very different kind of paperwork. The rotors knocked his words apart at the edges, but the intent landed. Mara was already focused on the man in front of her. The corpse man slid an IV into a vein that had not yet collapsed. Another peeled back the bandage on Reddick's chest. The skin beneath was swollen, mottled with bruises and dried blood. She picked up the scalpel. Light from the clear sky flashed off the blade for an instant, a bright white line against steel, then disappeared into shadow as she moved. Her hand did not shake. She found the space between ribs by feel. Pressed, marked, breathed. On my count, she said. The helicopter shuddered as a gust of wind hit the rotors. The hull vibrated. Her fingers adjusted without thinking. 1, she said. 2, 3. She drew the blade through skin quick and clean. Blood welled, then thinned. A courseman passed her the needle. She slid it into the wound angle, precise depth measured against the memory of 100 other chests. There was a heartbeat of resistance, then a hiss. Air tore out past the needle, hot and sharp. Reddick's shoulders slackened a fraction. The left side of his chest rose a little more on the next breath. Chest tube, she said. They handed her the drainage tube. She guided it in, secured it, connected it to the collection unit. Everything moved to a rhythm that had nothing to do with the rotors and everything to do with the fragile muscle under her hands that needed space to beat. The monitor that had been a mess of irregular spikes settled into a clear pattern. Not perfect, not strong, but enough. The corpsman nearest her let out a laugh that was almost a sob. You are a machine, he said half under his breath. Mara ignored the words. She watched Reddick's face. His eyelids drooped, but his color shifted from ashy gray towards something closer to human. His hand twitched against the strap at his side. She stepped back just enough to let the corpsman secure the equipment for transport. Get him downstairs, she said. Trauma bay as fast as they can move him without jarring that tube. Hanley leaned into the cabin long enough to meet her eyes. Copy, he said. We will coordinate with your ER. He signaled to the crew. The stretcher moved, lifted, past to waiting hands just outside the rotor wash. For a moment, Reddick's gaze found her again. He did not try to speak this time. The lines on his face eased just slightly. Then he was gone, carried across the pad toward the stairwell. The rotors began to spool down. Wind eased. The roar softened to a hard mechanical sigh. Mara stepped down from the helicopter. Her knees felt the spent adrenaline only when her feet were on concrete again. She pulled off her blood-streaked gloves and dropped them into the red disposal bin mounted on the wall. The air above the roof was suddenly huge and quiet, the sky wide open. Staff from St. Gabriel stood in a loose semicircle, some with mouths still parted as if there were words caught there. Karen's eyes were fixed on Mara. Noah had come up at some point and now stood near the door chest, rising and falling fast from the stairs. Hanley straightened in front of her. For the first time since he had entered the hospital, he did not look like he was in a sprint. He brought his hand up in a crisp salute. Doc Quinn, he said, it is an honor to work with you again. The title hung there as real as the helicopter at her back and the hospital at her feet. Mara did not return the salute. She had no uniform to anchor the gesture. Her hand stayed at her side, fingers still tingling from the feel of Reddick's ribs, the vibration of the helicopter, the brief give of trapped air finally escaping. She gave a small nod instead. Behind her, the metal skin of the aircraft caught the sun. Light slid along its side, jumped to the discarded scalpel on the deck, then faded as a cloud crossed the face of the sky. The rooftop pad that had been written off as dead weight vibrated gently as the engines wound down. The sound settled into the bones of the building, into the footprints on the concrete, into the space where Mara Quinn stood with her scrubs ruffled by the last breaths of rotor wash and 100 new eyes trying to decide who she was. The roar of the engines faded to a low churn. The helicopter blades slowed, chopping the air in wider, lazier circles until they were more shadow than threat. The spell that had held everyone on the roof broke. Orderlies and techs peeled away, following the stretcher that carried Lieutenant Jacob Reddick toward the stairwell. The corpsmen moved with the rigid focus of people who had survived plenty of chaos by walking in straight lines through it. Noah dragged his gaze from the retreating group and looked back at Mara. You were in the teams, he said, not quite making it a question. The corners of her vision felt too sharp. The wind pushed at her scrubs. On the deck near her foot, the scalpel lay where she had left it, metal edge dulled by a smear of blood. Mara stepped around it carefully. I'm going downstairs, she said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone who had not just opened a man's chest on a landing pad. She headed for the roof door. Karen pressed herself against the wall as Mara passed, as if contact might be contagious. Her eyes were huge pupils blown wide. Fear sat next to indignation in her expression, neither fully winning. You think this excuses anything, Karen said. Mara paused with one hand on the door bar. No, she said, it does not excuse anything. The words carried more weight for her than for anyone listening. In the stairwell, the air was cooler, tinged with the copper tang of blood carried on the corpsman's gloves and the chemical sweetness of hospital disinfectant. Reddick's stretcher was already half a flight below. The techs taking him exchanged clipped updates with the trauma team that had run up to meet them. Oxygen sats climbing, tube and drainage working. Watch that line, watch his head. Mara followed without inserting herself. Boots and rubber soles slapped the concrete. The rotors above sank into a distant hum that lived in the bones of the building and in the bones of her own chest. By the time she reached the emergency bay, Reddick was through the double doors and swallowed by the machine of the trauma team. An anesthesiologist barked orders. A trauma surgeon she had only seen in passing snapped on a pair of gloves and began directing the room in a full formal voice that left no space for anyone else's. Mara stopped at the threshold. Through a pane of tempered glass, she could see Reddick's arm sprawled on the gurney I-4 lines webbing from it. The tube emerging from his chest pulsed with each breath the ventilator gave him. His face was almost entirely obscured by masks and tubing now. The man she knew sat somewhere under layers of equipment and protocol. Quinn. Noah stood beside her, breathing hard hair damp at the temples. "You are not going in," he asked. "They have a team," she said. "They do not need one more person in the way." He stared at her profile for a long moment. "What exactly were you before you decided to fold linens here?" he asked. Mara kept her eyes on the glass. "Ground support," she said. "That is all." He huffed out a humorless sound. "Ground support," he repeated. "Right?" They stood there until the trauma doors swung closed, cutting off the view. Word traveled faster than the stretcher had. By the time Mara stripped her soiled scrubs in the locker room and pulled on a clean set, the hospital buzzed with a new kind of energy. Conversations snapped shut when she came within earshot. Heads turned, then turned away too quickly. At the nurses' station, someone had a phone out. The small screen showed a shaky video of a helicopter on the roof, zoomed in far enough that the pixels blurred. The image stuttered as the person holding the phone tried to keep up with the figures on the pad. The angle caught the moment Hanley saluted. There, the tech with the phone said, "That is her. That is Quinn." Karen lunged across the counter and slapped the phone out of his hand. "We do not record patients on this property," she snapped. "Delete that right now, or I will have security escort you off the floor." The tech bent to pick up his phone, face flushed. "It is already online," he muttered. "My cousin saw it on 2 feeds before I even posted mine." Karen's jaw clenched. Her gaze flicked to the corridor just as Mara appeared at the end of it. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. "Quinn," Karen said. "Administrator Whitmore wants you in his office." Mara nodded once, the same motion she gave when someone asked her to change a dressing or draw labs. "Yes, ma'am," she said. The walk to the administrative wing cut through a quieter part of the hospital. The floors there shone a little brighter. The art on the walls cost a little more. The hum of equipment was replaced by the soft click of keyboards and the muted ring of desk phones. Charles Whitmore's office door stood open. Through it, Mara could see a wide desk of dark wood diplomas in matching frames, a flat screen on the wall, silently cycling through cable news channels. On one of the channels, a still image of the St. Gabriel helipad filled the screen. A caption in bright red text sat beneath it. "Unknown nurse performs emergency surgery on Navy SEAL." Whitmore reached for the remote with quick, jerky fingers and killed the screen as Mara stepped in. "Ms. Quinn, have a seat," he said. She stayed standing. "I prefer to stand," she said. Whitmore pressed his lips together. He was in his 50s, his tie knotted too tightly, his shirt collar beginning to dampen at the edges. His office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. He folded his hands on the desk. "Do you understand the position you have put this institution in?" he asked. Mara watched his fingers instead of his eyes. The knuckles were smooth, no scars. "I understand that the patient would not have survived transport to a formal operating room," she said. "That is not an answer to my question," he said. He lifted a file from the corner of his desk and flipped it open. "Your personnel documents indicate no surgical privileges," he continued. "No advanced trauma credentials beyond standard ER certification. Yet you took it upon yourself to perform an invasive procedure in an unsecured, non-sterile environment without authorization from any supervising physician." He inhaled through his nose, held it, and exhaled slowly as if he had practiced this pattern in front of a mirror. "This is a legal nightmare," he said. "If that man dies, his family will sue. If he lives, someone will still sue. The Navy will distance itself. The press will eat us alive. You might feel like you saved the day up there, but from where I am sitting, you have exposed us to a catastrophic level of liability." Liability. The word was clean and crisp and had nothing to do with the sound a chest made when air finally flowed into a crushed lung. "I acted to save a life," Mara said. Her tone did not rise. "That is what I was trained to do." "You were trained," Whitmore said, "to follow protocols." "Our protocols. This is not a battlefield. It is a civilian hospital with insurance contracts and board reviews and a very specific set of rules." He pointed at a form in her file that she could not read from where she stood. You signed a policy acknowledgement that clearly states nurses at St. Gabriel do not perform surgery, he said. I cannot imagine what made you think you were an exception to that. Mara could feel the shape of the response that wanted to climb out of her chest. It tasted like dust and jet fuel and 3 hours of waiting for a helicopter that never came. She swallowed it. If there are consequences, she said, I will accept them. You are suspended pending review, Whitmore said, almost in relief, now that he had reached a conclusion. Turn in your badge and your access card. You are not to touch another patient until this is resolved. A sharp knock hit the door before she could unclip her badge. Whitmore's assistant leaned in, face pale. Sir, she said, there are people here from the Department of Defense. They say it is urgent. Whitmore blinked. What he said. They have identification, she added quickly. They insist on seeing you now. He smoothed his tie and stood. Send them in, he said. He did not offer Mara a chair or ask her to leave. She stepped back toward the wall, out of the way, hands loosely at her sides. 2 people entered. The first wore a dark green uniform with the insignia of a major on the shoulder. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, her posture straight without seeming forced. The second wore a suit the color of wet asphalt. His tie understated his expression unreadable. A leather briefcase hung from his hand. Mr. Whitmore. Oui, excusez-moi, the major asked with foreboding. George? Yes, he said. Who are you exactly? Major Elena Ruiz, Judge, Advocate General's Corps, she said. She nodded toward her companion. This is Mark Harlow, counsel for the Department of Defense. Whitmore's eyes flicked from the rank on her shoulder to the seal on the leather folder Harlow carried. I am in the middle of a sensitive personnel matter, Whitmore said. Perhaps we can schedule a time to discuss whatever this is. I am afraid this cannot wait, Harlow said. His voice was calm, but there was no space in it for argument. He set the briefcase on the edge of the desk and opened it. Inside, a stack of folders with diagonal red stripes lay waiting. A small brass plate on the top sheet read, classified in stark letters. Ruiz glanced around the office, her gaze landing on Mara. Specialist Quinn, she said. Mara inclined her head. Major, she said. Whitmore looked between them. You know each other, he said. Not personally, Ruiz said. I have read her file. Whitmore swallowed. She is the subject of that file, he said. She violated multiple hospital protocols. Harlow slid one of the folders across the desk toward him. Ms. Quinn operates under Department of Defense Medical Authority at Level 5, Harlow said. That authority includes emergency surgical privileges in any environment where loss of life is imminent and no comparably qualified provider is immediately available. Your hospital's internal policies do not supersede that. Whitmore stared at the folder as if it might bite. I was not informed of any such arrangement, he said. Harlow looked mildly tired. With respect, Mr. Whitmore, he said, you were not required to be informed. Need-to-know restrictions applied to the mission under which these authorities were granted. Whitmore licked his lips. And that mission is relevant here, Howie asked. Ruiz's gaze softened for the first time, just a fraction, when she looked back at Mara. Operation Iron Veil, she said. The room seemed to pull tighter around the name. Whitmore frowned. I have never heard of it, he said. You were not supposed to, Ruiz said. Until very recently, almost no one outside Naval Special Warfare and a handful of staff at the Pentagon had. She opened another folder. Photographs lay inside black and white images of a narrow valley at night, flares blooming overhead, heat signatures ghostly and small against rough terrain. A grainy shot showed shapes clustered around what might have been a rock outcropping, a structure, or just a trick of light. Another image showed the same valley 18 minutes later. The shapes on the ground were no longer moving. Ruiz turned the pages so that the images faced Whitmore. 3 years ago, she said, a SEAL team was deployed into this terrain. A scheduled extraction was requested when the team took heavier resistance than anticipated. That extraction was delayed. Delayed, Whitmore repeated. Cancelled, then resubmitted if you want the precise term, Harlow said. For a duration of 18 minutes. He tapped a finger on a timestamp printed below one of the photographs. During those 18 minutes, the team was pinned under sustained enemy fire, he said. Communications from the ground indicate multiple casualties. One medic repeatedly requested immediate extraction due to worsening conditions. Ruiz closed the folder. Specialist Quinn was that medic, she said. Mara kept her eyes on a point just past Whitmore's shoulder. The taste of dust was back in her throat. The official report, Harlow continued, lists the delay as a communications failure, weather interference, equipment malfunction. Unfortunately, none of those explanations fully match the data we have recovered from the command system since. Whitmore sank back into his chair. What happened? He asked. Ruiz and Harlow shared a look. A senior officer at the command center chose to prioritize a scheduled media event over immediate extraction of the team, Ruiz said. Stood down the bird that was on its way, ordered it held. The delay left the team exposed on the ground without support. She let the words sit in the air. One member of SEAL Team 9 survived, she said. Specialist Quinn. She dragged as many of her teammates as she could toward cover, repeatedly left relative safety to pull men who were still breathing back into the circle. When the helicopter finally launched, she loaded the wounded before herself. Harlow closed the folder with a soft thud. The actions she took that night are the reason she carries the authority she does now, he said. Combat proficiency and trauma care under fire against the clock. Whitmore stared at Mara as if seeing her for the first time. In her report, he asked, "You said it blamed bad weather, equipment." Ruiz nodded. She signed a report that did not include the order cancellation, Ruiz said. She took the word of the commanding officers who told her that if she raised that issue, Iron Veil would tear a hole through the community that might never close. Her attention flicked to Mara again. "You chose silence," Ruiz said quietly. "It was not my place to burn it down," Mara said. Her voice came out rough. "People needed the teams to keep functioning. I was not going to be the reason they did not." For the first time since the conversation began, Whitmore had nothing to say. The phone on his desk lit up and vibrated silently. His assistant's name flashed, followed by the single word, media. Harlow noted the glance. "The rooftop video is already on multiple networks," he said. "The story of what happened at Iron Veil is starting to leak as a result of our presence here. You will not be able to keep this contained to internal memos and disciplinary hearings." Whitmore exhaled slowly. "What are you asking of me?" he said. "We are not asking," Ruiz said. "We are informing you Ms. Quinn is not to be suspended. Any internal investigation into her rooftop actions will note her federal authority and the emergent nature of the situation. If you attempt to sanction her for saving a life under those conditions, you will find yourself answering not just to your board, but to the Pentagon." Silence settled over the office. Mara stood very still. Her hands itched for something to do, a bandage to tape down a chest, to listen to a count to hold in her head. The walls felt close and too clean. "Lieutenant Reddick is stable," Ruiz added. "For now, he is in your ICU under guard. When he is fully conscious, he intends to make a statement." Whitmore swallowed. "To who?" he asked. Ruiz's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Everyone," she said. The ICU felt like a different hospital entirely. The lights were softer, the noise more controlled. Machines spoke in quieter tones, beeps and hisses moderated, alarms tuned to draw attention without panic. The air was cooler, scrubbed and rescrubbed. Mara stood just outside the glass of Reddick's room. He lay propped at a slight incline tube, still in place, chest wrapped. The ventilator had been traded for a lighter mask. A heart monitor traced green waves across a small screen by his head. A camera sat on a tripod near the foot of the bed, red recording light off for the moment. 2 uniformed sailors stood guard in the hallway, one on each side of the door. Their shoulders straightened when Ruiz approached, but they did not move to block her. "Ready?" Ruiz asked, addressing Reddick. His eyes opened. The whites were veined and tired, but focus sat behind them. "Been ready for 3 years," he said. His voice was still rough, but stronger than it had been in the helicopter. The public affairs officer adjusted the camera settings, checked the audio levels, nodded. "We are recording," he said. Reddick looked at the camera for a long second. Then his gaze slid past it, found Mara's reflection in the glass. He could not see her directly from his angle, but the way his eyes settled made it clear he knew she was there. "My name is Lieutenant Jacob Reddick," he said. "United States Navy, formerly attached to SEAL Team 9. He took a breath. The lines of pain around his mouth deepened, then eased. "3 years ago, my team and I were on the ground at a place that your news will probably call Iron Veil," he said. "We were told a helicopter was coming. We held that position waiting for the sound of rotors that did not arrive when they should have." His hand shifted on the sheet. "One person made sure as many of us as possible lived long enough to hear those rotors when they finally did show up," he said. "Our medic, Specialist Mara Quinn, she ran into fire for us more than once when there was nowhere left to run." He paused, throat working. "You may hear that she wrote a report that did not call out the officer who canceled our extraction," he said. "You may be told that she chose the institution over justice. That is not how I see it. I see someone who carried a failure that was not hers alone, because she thought the rest of us needed something to stay standing." The room stayed very still. Even the machines seemed to quiet. "She saved my life on that roof today," Reddick said. "She also saved it 3 years ago by dragging me through a killing field and then staying quiet about why we were in that field for so long. I am done with that quiet. If anyone is looking for someone to blame, they can start with the people who ordered our bird turned around, not with the medic who refused to stop treating us, even after the paperwork told her she should." His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again. "You want to know who Mara Quinn is?" he said. "She is the reason any of us came home. She is the reason I am lying in this bed instead of in a box with a flag on top." He let his head fall back against the pillow. The public affairs officer signaled that the recording was done. Outside, the glass staff who had gathered in the corridor pretended to find other tasks. Some wiped at their eyes, quick and furtive. Others just stood, hands on charts that had not been updated. Karen was there. At some point, she had wandered up from the chaos of the ER and stopped near the back of the cluster. Her shoulders were rigid. Her face was difficult to read, pulled between shame and something else. Noah stood beside her, arms folded, gaze on the floor. Mara did not move. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger in pale blue fabric rooted to a spot that had not existed in her life a few hours ago. Inside the room, Reddick shifted his hand palm, outward, fingers barely lifting off the sheet. It was not a wave. It was more like a reach in her direction. She lifted her own hand, matching the shape. The glass between them stayed cool and solid. Her palm sat against her own reflection against his at the same time. The corridor outside the ICU stayed crowded longer than any code. People pretended to be just passing through charts and hand monitors to check. They lingered within sight of Reddick's door. Their eyes kept sliding back to where Mara stood with her palm on the glass. Karen moved first. She stepped out from the knot of staff and stopped a few feet away. Her hands were empty fingers pressed so tightly together the knuckles blanched. Up close, the skin around her eyes looked raw as if she had been rubbing them. Mara, she said. It was the first time she had used her first name. Mara dropped her hand from the glass and turned. Yes, Nurse Blake, she said. Karen swallowed. I called you dead weight, she said. The words came out low and strained. I called you slow. I treated you like you did not belong on my floor. A muscle twitched in her jaw. I did not know who you were, she said. I did not even try to know. I just saw someone quiet and thought that meant weak. The hum of the ICU filled the space after her sentence. The ventilators, the soft chimes of monitors, the distant squeak of a gurney. Mara studied her face. Shame sat there, and something that looked dangerously close to grief. We all see what we are used to seeing, Mara said, until we are forced to see something else. I was wrong, Karen said. The admission seemed to cost her. About you. About a lot of things. Her voice thinned at the edges. She pressed her lips together as if biting back everything else she might say. Mara reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. Karen flinched, then stilled under the touch. I have misjudged people too, Mara said, especially when I did not understand what they were carrying. Karen's shoulders sagged a fraction as if something heavy had shifted. Before either of them could say more, a pair of communications staff from the administrative office appeared at the end of the hall. One of them wore a headset, the other held a clipboard laden with printed statements. Ms. Quinn, the one with the headset, called, We need you downstairs. The hospital's main lobby had been transformed. News vans lined the drop-off zone outside, cables snaking through the sliding doors. Camera tripods stood in a loose row. Microphones with logos from local and national stations waited on a long table. Security guards tried to look casual while watching everything. Under the vaulted ceiling, staff had gathered on the steps that led to the second floor. Scrubs, lab coats, and business suits mixed together an uneven patchwork of fabric and posture. On a small platform near the center, a podium had been set up. The hospital's logo glowed on the front. Charles Whitmore stood behind it, knuckles white on the sides, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Mara stayed at the edge of the crowd, not moving closer until a hand lightly touched her elbow. Major Ruiz stood beside her, uniform, crisp eyes sharp. You should be up front, Ruiz said. Mara shook her head. I was told to come here, she said, not to speak. Ruiz considered that for a moment. Then stand where you can leave if you need to, she said. She did not push her further. Whitmore cleared his throat into the microphone. The feedback squeal made half the room wince. Thank you all for coming, he began. His voice carried a wobble that did not come from the sound system. This morning, St. Gabriel Medical Center received an emergency landing from a United States Navy helicopter, he said. A critically injured service member was brought to our helipad. An emergency intervention took place there. He paused, eyes flickering toward Mara for a fraction of a second. A member of our nursing staff, Ms. Mara Quinn, performed a procedure outside her documented scope of practice, he said. In doing so, she saved a life. The cameras leaned forward collectively. I would like to state clearly that our initial internal reaction failed to recognize the full context of her actions, Whitmore said. We saw forms and credentials. We did not see the person behind them. He exhaled, visibly steadying himself. I owe Ms. Quinn a public apology, he said. On behalf of this hospital, I am sorry. We are reviewing our policies to understand how someone entrusted with such responsibility in one arena could be treated as less than that in another. There was a murmur in the crowd. A man in a dark suit with a flag pin on his lapel stepped up beside the podium. He had been standing off to the side, surrounded by aides. His hair was impeccably combed, his smile practiced. Whitmore seated the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the man said, voice smooth. I am Senator Graham Pierce, When I heard what happened on your roof and when I learned about Specialist Quinn's record, I requested a briefing. He looked out over the room as if speaking to a chamber, not a hospital lobby. Acts of courage in combat are one thing, he said. Acts of courage carried quietly into civilian life with no expectation of recognition are another. In light of what we now know, I intend to submit Ms. Quinn's name for one of the highest honors available to a civilian. The word honor seemed to hang in the air. Several cameras turned, searching for Mara's face in the crowd. Ms. Quinn Pierce said, "Would you join us up here?" Heads turned toward her. The space around her opened as people shifted aside. Mara's feet felt heavy as she walked forward. The platform was only 3 shallow steps high, but they seemed taller when she reached them. She stood beside Whitmore, slightly behind the podium. The lights from the cameras were bright enough to sting. Pierce smiled at her like a man used to standing next to heroes. "You have the gratitude of a nation," he said quietly for her ears alone. "You may not like attention, but sometimes it finds the right people anyway." She looked at him, then at the crowd, then at the microphone. Pierce stepped aside and gestured. She leaned in just close enough for the microphone to pick up her voice. "I did my job," she said. "That is all." The room shifted restlessly at the brevity. She did not stop. "If there is any recognition to give," she said, "give it to the people who run toward every alarm in this building. The ones who work 16 hours, get shouted at, miss meals, and still walk into the next room like the last one did not drain them." Her gaze moved over Karen, over Noah, over the techs and housekeeping staff standing in the back. "They are the ones who carry this place," she said. "They are the ones you do not put in headlines. If you have something to pin on somebody, pin it on them." There was a quiet that felt different from before. Not the hush of shock, but of a room adjusting its view. Pierce recovered with a politician's speed. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why she deserves what we are talking about," he said lightly. "Selfless service does not always announce itself." He reclaimed the microphone and moved seamlessly into assurances about support for a veteran's commitments to transparency, phrases that sounded meaningful and were designed to fit neatly into sound bites. Mara stepped back off the platform, finding the edge of the crowd again. When the press conference finally broke apart, when the lights and microphones retreated, and the front doors swallowed the news crews, the hospital exhaled. In Whitmore's office, the blinds were half closed. Sunlight filtered through in narrow bands that striping the floor and the edge of the desk. Whitmore had removed his tie. It lay coiled near the phone. His shirt collar was open. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the weight of the building had settled deeper onto his shoulders. Mara stood by the window, not sitting, even though a chair waited behind her. "I cannot undo how we treated you," Whitmore said. "I can, however, choose what we do with you now." Mara watched a dust mote float through the beam of light from the blinds. "I am still a nurse," she said. "That has not changed." "Neither has the fact that you are clearly more than that," Whitmore said. He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. "Our board is going to want to put your face on every brochure we print for the next decade," he said. "They will want you to chair committees, sit on panels, maybe even take some kind of symbolic role. Chief of something, ambassador of something." He waved a hand, dismissing his own list. "I am asking you directly," he said. "What do you want from this hospital?" The question rendered the room oddly quiet. Mara thought of charts and alarms and the rhythm of compressions, of Reddick's chest under her palms, of the code that morning, the way panic had eaten through a simple protocol because the people running it were tired and scared and at war with their own systems. "I do not want a title," she said. Whitmore's brow furrowed. "No," he said. "I want a team," she said. He sat up a little straighter. "What kind of team?" he asked. Mara turned from the window. "A rapid response unit," she said. "Small, focused. People who train together, trust each other, move without arguing every step. When a call comes in that someone is dying right now, they go. No hesitation, no politics." She let the outline settle between them. "They would answer codes, major traumas, everything where minutes matter," she said. "They would have clear roles, clear communication. No space for the kind of chaos we had this morning before I stepped in." Whitmore tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. "That would require budget," he said. "New protocols, union discussions. We would have to justify why some staff get that training and not others." "Then justify it," she said, "by the outcomes." The words were simple. The conviction behind them was not. He looked at her for a long time. "You would lead this unit," he said. "I would help build it," she said. "Leadership should be earned in the space, not handed from your office." He huffed out a short breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "I do not know how much I can get past the board," he said, "but I am tired of this place being run on paperwork more than on sense. If I can push this through, I will." Mara inclined her head. "Thank you," she said. He picked up his phone. "We will start with volunteers," he said. "People who want to be there will work better than people we assign. Send out a call, see who answers." By the time Mara stepped back into the ER, word had outrun her again. A clipboard hung on the wall near the charge desk. At the top of the sheet, in thick marker, someone had written, Rapid Response Unit interest sign-up. Names filled the first few lines already. Nurses, techs, one respiratory therapist, a resident whose handwriting was practically illegible. Karen stood near the board, arms folded, reading the names. She did not notice Mara until she was close. "You are going to run this thing," Karen said. Mara glanced at the list. "I'm going to try to make it work," she said. Karen's gaze dropped to the empty lines further down the page. "I do not expect you to forget how I talked to you," she said. "I do not expect you to trust me." She uncrossed her arms and picked up the pen. For once, her hand shook. "I still want to be on it," she said. The squeak of the marker on paper sounded loud in the busy ER as she wrote her name slowly, carefully, as if getting each letter right mattered more than usual. She put the pen back in its clip and stepped aside. "I want to learn what it looks like," she said. "Real competence. Real leadership. Not just standing behind a desk and barking at people until they move." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Mara looked at her for a long moment. "I do not need perfect people," Mara said. "I need people willing to change. Can you do that?" Karen's throat worked. "I can try," she said, "every day." Something eased in Mara's chest. "Then write your name again," she said, "on the second line too." Karen blinked. "Why?" she asked. "So you have to see it twice," Mara said. "Reminder that you asked for this." Karen let out a short, choked sound that might have been laughter. She picked up the pen and beneath her first neat K. Blake added a second, slightly messier version. As she set the marker down, a light caught the silver clip and flashed for an instant before fading. Around them, the ER kept moving. Monitors beeped, wheels rolled. Somewhere down the hall, an alarm chimed and a voice called for assistance. Mara read the list of names one by one and felt the shape of something new taking hold inside the familiar walls. Nearly a year slipped by before anyone realized the hum of the hospital had changed. It had not gotten softer. If anything, St. Gabriel was busier. The difference lived in the way people moved when alarms sounded, the way voices shifted from sharp to clear, the way panic had learned to step aside for something more focused. The first real test came on a Tuesday close to sunset. The first siren reached them as a thin wail through the glass of the ambulance bay. The second and third layered over it all at slightly different pitches, turning the air thick with sound. In triage, the phones lit up at once. "Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate," the clerk called out, a hand over the receiver. "They are saying a bus, possible entrapments, multiple pediatric patients." Heads lifted. For half a second, the usual static of the ER tried to swell conversations threatening to fray. Then the call came through the overhead speakers. "Quinn Rapid Response Unit to emergency intake." The words had only been in the system a few months, but the corridor knew how to respond. Doors opened. Clipboards went down. A set of red vests appeared from a storage cabinet and landed in waiting hands. The patch on the front of each one showed the hospital logo and 3 simple letters, QRU. Mara had been in a supply room with a new hire counting restock. The sound of the overhead page stopped the new nurse mid-count. Her eyes went wide. "Is that us?" she asked. "That is us, right?" "Layla, take a breath," Mara said. Lila Moreno did what she always did when she was trying to hide nerves. She nodded too many times. "Right," Layla said. "Breathing. I can do that." She inhaled. The air smelled like plastic wrap and alcohol wipes and the faint rubber scent of new tubing. "In through the nose," Mara said. 4 counts, hold for 7, then out, slow. Lila obeyed. Her shoulders dropped a little. "You are here because you are ready," Mara said. "Your fear does not get to make decisions. Your training does." Lila nodded this time only once. "Ready," she said. They stepped out into the hallway. QRU was already forming at the intake doors. Karen stood with a tablet in her hands, hair pulled into a more practical bun than she had worn a year before. A paramedic vest hugged her over her scrubs. She looked different in very small ways. The stubborn line to her jaw was still there, but it sat beside something steadier. "Highway patrol reports at least 20 injured," Karen said as Mara approached. "Bus full of kids, driver pinned 2 other vehicles. First wave is 5 minutes out." Mara slid on a vest and took the tablet from her. "Set up 3 zones," Mara said. "Red for immediate, yellow for delayed, green for walking wounded. We keep them out of each other's way." She moved her finger over the screen, sketching the layout. "Rhesus bays are already full," Noah said, appearing beside them. He had his own vest on stethoscope looped around his neck. "We can clear 2 in 10 minutes, but not faster." "QRU will stabilize an intake first," Mara said. "We are not waiting for empty rooms. We can keep airways open and chairs if we have to." Noah gave a short nod, accepting the plan without argument. Outside, the first ambulance lights bounced off the glass. Wind pushed a warm rush of exhaust into the bay as the doors opened. The first stretcher rolled in, metal legs clanging as they dropped into place. The boy on it was maybe 11. Blood matted his hair. His right leg lay at an angle that did not belong to anything unbroken. He was conscious and trying not to cry, his mouth pressed flat. "Name?" Mara asked, stepping up on the left side of the stretcher. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan, you and I are going to trade jobs?" Mara said, walking alongside as they moved. "You just breathe. I will do all the worrying." He sucked in air that hitched. QRU took shape around him. "Massive hemorrhage," Nishmara called. "Mark red. Keep him front. Tourniquet high on that leg. Noah, I want eyes on his pressure." Behind them, another ambulance backed in. Lila moved toward it as if her feet had memorized the pattern already. A paramedic swung open the rear doors. "Airway compromise," he shouted. "Strider, she almost stopped on us twice." The girl inside was small, maybe 9 eyes glazed, lips tinged blue. Her breaths rasped, each one a narrow thread of sound that carried more struggle than air. Lila's throat tightened. For a fraction of a second, the noise around her blurred into one thick wave. Then she remembered the count. In, 4, hold 7, out, 8. The numbers cut through the noise. "Red tag," she said, voice clearer. "Possible airway obstruction." She climbed into the rig, gloved up, leaned over the girl. "Hi," Lila said. "I am Lila. I'm going to help you breathe." The girl's eyelids fluttered. Mara glanced over from her own stretcher, saw Lila's shoulders squared and steady, then turned back to Ethan. The bay filled. Red, yellow, green tags fluttered on wrists and ankles. QRU moved between them, each member in a place that had been drilled and re-drilled in simulations but never quite tested like this. Outside, another set of sirens approached. This one had a different tone, lower and more insistent. Helicopter. Mara did not have to see it to know. The sound brushed against her nerves in a way that would never be entirely comfortable. She looked up through the bay doors. Across the campus above the hospital's rooftop, a small Navy helicopter circled. It banked once, lining itself with the pad. The rotors flickered against the late afternoon sky blades, catching sunlight in quick flashes. "Karen, you have intake," Mara said. "Lila, you stay with your airway. Noah, do not let Ethan talk you into anything heroic." Ethan, who had already tried to sit up twice, blinked at her. "Heroic?" he asked. "Like refusing pain meds," she said. "If he starts that, tell him Doc Quinn said no." She stepped back from the bed, handing off calmly, then headed for the stairwell. Her feet took the stairs 2 at a time. The familiar vibration in the concrete grew stronger with each flight. At the top, she pushed through the roof door. Hot wind hit her, flavored with jet fuel and sun-warmed tar. The helicopter sat on the pad, smaller than the one from a year ago, a utility craft instead of a heavy lifter. Its rotors still spun but slower stabilizing. The pilot sat visible behind the glass of the cockpit. When he saw her, he lifted a hand from the controls and brought it to the brim of his helmet in a small, neat salute. This time there was no emergency on the deck, no blood on the concrete, no shouting. The pilot pointed down toward the intake bay with 2 fingers, then gave her a thumbs up as if to say the handoff had gone well and the bird had done its part. She nodded a simple acknowledgement and stepped back from the wash. The spinner slowed further, the blades lengthening into clear shapes instead of smears of motion. The sound dropped from a roar to a deep, contented purr. She stood at the edge of the painted circle and looked out. From the roof, the city spread toward the horizon, all concrete and glass, and the blue line of the bay. The sun sat low, laying gold over the water and the windows and the metal railings. She slid her hand up to her collar. The small combat medic badge that had once lived hidden in a locker now rested on her scrubs, pinned where a visitor could see it if they looked closely. The metal had been polished at some point. It still held its scratches, but they had taken on a different quality, less like damage and more like a map. Light caught on the badge, a bright point that flared and softened as she turned. For a long moment she let herself feel the way the wind ran over her skin, the way the last breath of the rotor wash tugged at her sleeves. There had been a time when every vibration in a building felt like a threat. Every distant thrum had been a promise broken. The sound of rotors had belonged only to places where men bled in the dark. Now it belonged to here as well. Behind her through the roof door, she could hear the hospital living its life. Voices calling out vital stats, wheels rolling, the low, confident tone of Karen giving instructions, the bright, nervous edge of Lila reporting a successful intubation, Noah laughing at something Ethan had said through a haze of pain medication. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to feel all of it at once. Iron Veil still existed. It always would. The valley would stay in the back of her mind, in the way her shoulders tensed at sudden sounds, in the way she slept lighter than most. But there was this roof too, this building, these people. She opened her eyes again. The pilot finished his checks, gave her one last small wave, then eased the helicopter up off the pad. The machine lifted slow and steady, nose dipping in a graceful arc over the hospital. For a second, the sun caught the underside of the fuselage and turned it into a bright streak against the sky. She watched it go until it was a speck, then nothing. The badge on her collar warmed against her skin. She touched it lightly with 2 fingers, not to hide it, but to feel the weight. When she turned away from the edge of the pad and headed back toward the door, the sound that followed her down the stairs was not the echo of the helicopter alone. It was the layered heartbeat of a hospital that had learned a different way to move, a different way to respond. Her hands were bare when she pushed the door open at the bottom, stepping back into the light and noise of the ER. Gloves waited at the wall, ready for whatever came next. Her name was on the roster near the QRU list, not as a secret, not as a note buried in a file, but as part of the pattern that kept the place steady. She pulled a pair of gloves from the box, snapped them on, and walked toward the sound of voices calling her name. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.